Last night, I asked you your name and you refused. She said, actually, you asked if I had a name. I thought you had more respect for words than that. This is Bedtime Stories, Grownup Edition, Genesis, Part 1. On the outdoor patio of the Scat Jazz Lounge in Fort Worth, Texas, St. Artemis Montclair, second-born son of deceased kingpin Nigel St. James, was having a rather difficult time keeping his dimples under wraps. The beautiful young woman sitting across the table from him had his undivided attention, and the fact that she would not be going back to his hotel with him did not take away from his level of enjoyment. When he'd arrived in Texas the night before, he wasn't quite ready to reconnect with his newly found family or his older brother, Sincere. He was still coming to grips with the fact that he'd lost both of his parents in a matter of months, and having just left his hometown of Miami, where it was on him to inform his younger triplet sisters that their mother was also deceased, still had him a little bit in his feelings. So he decided that he needed at least a full day alone to clear his mind, enjoy his own company, and just decompress. No one even needed to know that he was in town until the following day, when he'd see them all at Stephanie and Corey's going away karaoke night. When he left his sisters back in Miami, they had taken the news rather well. So he jumped on one of the St. James private planes and headed back to New York, packed his suitcase and carry-on with leisure time in mind, and hopped on a commercial flight to DFW International Airport. Flying commercial served two purposes. It allowed him to arrive in Texas without the family being aware, and it also afforded him the opportunity to test his skills of observation in crowded places. As a newly minted finisher for the St. James family, Saint's training was not quite complete, and according to Big Wood, who'd been giving him hands-on training, it would actually never end. Even when he was on a break, he was still working, because he still had to be on the lookout for potential tails, covert operatives that might be on the payroll of five family enemies, and he needed to constantly and consistently test the foundation of his various aliases. While his personality as a loner made him great at what he did, going days and sometimes weeks without human interaction made him a little stir-crazy. And since he knew that it wouldn't be long before he'd be back in the field and off the grid with his big brother Sincere, finishing the last 2 of 7 assignments Sincere had received from their stepmother Catherine, one in Japan and the other in Paris, he wanted to spend his brief vacation in relaxation mode, stress-free, doing the things that he loved, and hopefully doing them with a new woman. Unlike his older brother, he didn't have any female friends on his roster. He'd cut them all off when he committed himself to being a finisher. He'd completely disappeared from his old life and cut all ties with any and everyone he knew, except for his siblings, of course. According to the OGs in the game, his job as a finisher would be easier and safer that way. So when his plane landed, he checked into the Omni DFW, hit the shower, shaved, got fresh to death, and headed over to the jazz spot. He figured he'd listen to his favorite genre of music, put back a few beers, check the scene, and if he was lucky, he'd meet a woman who perhaps was traveling just like him and in town for a good time, not a long time, who was looking for a temporary acquaintance with a man who was traveling too. While that was his desire, he had no idea that he'd lay eyes on an absolutely beautiful woman across the room at a bar top table with 2 other ladies, chopping it up, laughing, smiling, enjoying the music, light refreshments, and atmosphere. He certainly did not expect to find himself intrigued by her adept ability to shoot every man down who tried to push up on her without issue. And when he anonymously sent around to the table of ladies, and the one he'd been eyeing declined for them all without hesitation, he was intrigued. When her 2 friends headed to the restroom, leaving her at the table, presumably to hold it for them, he made his move. Saint casually walked over to the table and said, "How you doing?" The young lady said, "I'm well, and you?" Saint said, "I'm a little sad." The young lady said, "Oh, really? And how's that my issue?" Saint said, "Well, You're the first woman that I've ever sent drinks to anonymously who turned them down. The young lady said, well, there's a first time for everything. Saint said, I'm sure there's a story. The young lady said, of course. Saint said, feel like sharing? The young lady said, it's been my experience that some men have the unfortunate habit of expecting something in exchange for their generosity. And whether it be my time, attention, or person, I'm not for sale. So I buy my own drinks. Saint said, I respect that. Well, I don't expect anything of you, and I won't make any demands. I've had my ears to the music, and since you walked in, I haven't been able to take my eyes off of you. I would be remiss if I let the opportunity to come over and introduce myself slip away. I'm hurt. I'm in town for a few days, and the woman said, and you're looking for someone to take you from sad to glad? I'm sorry, but I cannot be your entertainment. Saint said, nah, the music is entertainment enough. I'm single. I'm hoping that you are too. And while I'm in town, you and I can get to know one another better. If we both like what we hear and see, then perhaps we can stay in touch. If you live in these parts, then we can connect when I'm back in town. And if not, we can connect wherever you are when we're both free again. The woman asked, what exactly are you looking for, Art? Saint said, I'm open. The woman said, I'm not. Saint said, so you're not open to meet new people, take your time getting to know them, learn who they are, what they're about, and if and how you can be assets to one another's lives? The woman looked at Saint, a little intrigued herself, and said, now that's new. If more men were open in that way, they'd find that that is precisely what most women desire. But let me ask you this. To what end? Saint shrugged his shoulders and said, I don't put limitations or parameters on the connections that I make. People are entirely too multifaceted for that. Look at us in our early 20s, I'd guess, in a jazz bar on a Friday night. The lady said, agreed. But most people know exactly what it is that they're looking for, and they know what their end goal is. What's yours? Saint said, I'm not jaded enough to be diametrically opposed to falling in love. I don't have a bunch of past traumas that limit my ability to just be a friend. And I am not desperate enough to shape and mold myself into someone that I'm not, solely to create fleeting connections and transactional relationships. The young lady said, you put words together pretty well, don't you? So what would you say if I said that I'm not diametrically opposed to making new connections either, as long as those connections have a return on the investment? Saint said, I'd say that you're in good company because I avoid individuals who add no value to my life. And I don't work too hard to be a part of the lives of individuals who neither want nor need me in theirs. The woman smiled and said, my friends are waiting for me. I need to go. Perhaps we can continue this conversation. I'll be here tomorrow, same time. Then she stood up, and before she could walk to the front door where her friends were waiting, Saint said, do you have a name? And she said, no. My parents forgot to give me one. Then she walked away. The following night, Saint showed up at Scat Jazz Lounge 15 minutes prior to the time that he'd seen the ladies come in the night before. The table that they'd occupied was already taken by a group of older ladies who appeared to be in their mid-40s. He approached the table and said, excuse me, ladies. I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm meeting a young lady here, and I'd love to have this table. I wouldn't dare ask you for anything and not offer you something in return. So how about your drinks tonight be on my tab in exchange for the table? Three women looked at Saint like he was out of his damn mind. One of the ladies said, all these empty tables in here, and you want us to move? Saint said, I promise I'll make it worth your while. But the young lady I'm meeting is special, and so is this table. He waved over a waiter and looked over at the ladies and said, what do you say? One of the older women who'd been checking him out said, how about you forget about her? Let me holler at you, young buck. Saint chuckled and said, as flattered as I am and as beautiful as you are, I'd prefer to keep my word. When the waiter came over, he pulled out his wallet, pulled out his black card, looked at the ladies and said, last chance. And all three of the women quickly agreed. Free drinks on him, and he pulled out a black card. The employee took the card, started the tabs, and busted the table. At the exact time that the young woman had walked into the jazz bar the night before, She walked into it that night, and she walked in looking even better than she had the night before. Curly hair was blown out, bone straight, and a side part bob that she'd clipped out of her face with a diamond and pearl clip that Saint could tell just looking at it was real. On her neck, wrist, and ears was a matching diamond and pearl jewelry set. Her body was perfectly framed in an olive, square-necked, three-quarter length sleeve bodycon dress. On her feet were a pair of cream Givenchy heels, and under her arm was a matching Givenchy clutch. Her beautiful face was bare, accentuated with perfectly arched brows, full, natural length eyelash extensions, and an opaque pink shade of lip gloss that perfectly complemented her caramel complexion. With all of her physical assets on full display, Saint was most captivated by her almond-shaped eyes and her full, pouty lips. Lips that were turned up in a smile and perfectly parted to show her perfect teeth. Saint couldn't tell whether the gleam in her eyes were due to the fact that he'd actually been waiting for her, a result of her being happy to see him, or the product of her observation that he'd been waiting for her at the same table that she sat at the night before. Inside the jazz spot, there were only 2 tables and 2 seats at those tables that provided a patron with a bird's eye view of the front entrance, back entrance, and patio. The night before, he was seated in one of those seats at one of those tables, and so was she. Neither of them could have known why the other had made the table and seat selections that they did, but they'd made them for the very same reason. Saint's hope was that the young lady, who was still nameless, would see his choice on this night as sentiment and not a matter of safety. He stood to greet her and positioned himself behind one of the empty chairs, pulling it out as she arrived to avoid the uncomfortableness of having to decide whether to go in for a hug or not. She rewarded him with an even larger smile, and as she sat, he inhaled the scent of snowflakes and cashmere by Bath and Body Works. As he reclaimed his seat, he didn't miss the fact that she was checking him out too, and his appearance did not disappoint. At 6'2", a solid 215, Saint's muscular, very athletic build was tastefully adorned in tailored navy blue slacks made by Tom Ford. The muscles in his arms and chest were perfectly accentuated with a cream Luca Fulani, Australian pearl button-down shirt. On his feet and around his waist were brown matching Ferragamo belt and shoes. And as he walked to his seat, she didn't miss the smell of Burberry Hero cologne. And while neither his ears or his neck were adorned in jewelry, his wrist was fly but understated, because he was rocking a Tag Heuer Formula One Blueface. His hair was cut so low that he was nearly bald, but not so low that he didn't have a nice clean lineup. And while his face was covered in enough hair to appear like he had 5 o'clock shadow, that was lined up too. It was clear that he could, if he wanted, to grow a full beard. His mocha skin was smooth, without blemish, and his eyes were a perfect shade of chocolate brown. Little did the young lady know, Saint was wearing contact lenses. His natural eye color was way too appealing for his line of work. No one would be able to forget seeing a man his complexion with hazel eyes rimmed in green, where his older brother was at least 3 inches taller and 3 shades darker. With his father's natural dark chocolate eyes, he was the color of a mocha coffee with a touch of cream. Both his complexion and his eyes he'd inherited from his mother, Annabelle. His brother was dark, tall, and slim, like his father, Nigel. The one feature that they shared that made it clear that they were both their mother's sons was their dimples. And for all of their differences in appearance and build, their personalities were also night and day. Where Sincere was shallow, Saint was deep. In the areas where Sincere had a tendency to be more emotional, Saint was known to be more logical. And while both brothers were fiercely loyal and loved their families, Sincere lived his role as the oldest brother like an obligation. And Saint was the brother that their triplet sisters could count on to be emotionally connected to their life experiences. Sincere was more likely to react to an offense, while Saint would file it away for use at a later time. Sincere's downtime was filled with comedy and basketball, and Saint's downtime was filled with jazz music and a good book. So when they were both seated and drinks had been ordered, the young lady said, "I passed up a shindig at my boss's tonight, so I certainly hope you don't plan to waste my time." Saint said, "I'll do the best that I can to show you my appreciation. I'm sure you already know. You look lovely." The young lady said, "You look pretty good yourself." Saint said, "Last night, I asked you your name, and you refused." She said, "Actually, you asked if I had a name." Saint chuckled, and she said, "I thought you had more respect for words than that." Saint said, "You're right. Let's try that again. My name is Art. And you?" The woman said, "Tori. It's a pleasure to meet you, Art." Art said, "The pleasure is all mine, Tori. You from Texas?" Saint had used a redacted version of his middle name. His father had named him Saint Artemis Montclair. Artemis after his younger brother, and Montclair, his wife's maiden name. Tori had done the same. She'd used a redacted version of her middle name, Victoria. And like their seating selections, they had similar reasons for using alternative names. Tori, because she'd learned that the best way to keep her family and those with whom they were connected safe was to be as incognito as possible with strangers. And Saint, or Art, because his ability to be a ghost was dependent on not only being unlikely to be recognized, but on his ability to be anonymous. And before either of them knew what happened, hours had passed. They'd had drinks, finger foods, danced, moved to the patio where they could have more privacy and be able to better hear one another speak, and discussed a variety of shared interests. Everything from their favorite books, the last book that they'd each read, their eclectic music taste, their love of travel, and their favorite pastime, people watching. When the waiter brought him his tab, he realized that it was 2 a.m. and last call, and he'd completely missed Stephanie and Corey's going away karaoke night. Saint said, "What's the likelihood that I can see you again?" Tori said, "That depends on how long you plan to be in town." When Saint told her that he'd be in town for about another week, Tori informed him that she would not be available again until the following weekend. She had plans the following day, and she'd work all week. Her work week was demanding, and her evenings were already accounted for. So they departed, agreeing to meet there again the following Saturday at the same time. For all the hours that Saint and Tori spent conversing inside the jazz spot, there was so much that they didn't say. They shared very few details of their personal lives. Without either of them broaching the subjects, they masterfully avoided topics like their families, where they were born, where they were from, where they were educated, and where they were employed. And they certainly did not discuss where they lived. They didn't even exchange contact information. But Saint's occupation necessitated that he find out as much about Tori as he possibly could before he gave her access to that kind of information. So when he walked her out to the Uber that was waiting for her outside, he stealthily affixed a tracking device to it and made sure that she saw him, casually and slowly, walk into his rental car. He used his satellite phone to remotely connect to the tracking device, got in the vehicle, and followed the path of travel of the Uber. When the Uber stopped a few blocks away at a shopping center, he caught up and drove by just as the Uber was pulling back out of the parking lot, and he could clearly see that Tori was not inside. He looked up in just enough time to see her pulling out of the lot in a BMW 2 Series, all black 230i. That meant that not only had he lost the very expensive tracking device that he placed on the Uber, but it also meant that Tori was a smart woman. She hadn't had very much to drink inside the jazz bar, despite the hours that they'd been there. So she was clearly sober enough to drive, but she'd arranged for the Uber for her own personal safety, so that her vehicle couldn't be clocked and to limit the likelihood that she'd be followed. And Saint was impressed. He was even more impressed when she made a few quick turns, perfectly timed some lights, and lost him at an intersection right before she jumped on the highway. He had no idea whether she'd known that he was following her, but he couldn't run the light and risk being caught. He was just gonna have to enlist some help from some of the soldiers after their next meetup. When Tori hit the highway, she was shaking her head. 30 minutes before the time she was expecting Art to arrive at the jazz spot, she parked her car at the shopping center, had one of her homegirls meet her there, drive her to the restaurant across the street from the jazz spot, park, and wait. She'd seen when Art pulled up in the parking lot, and she'd watched him get out of his vehicle, peep the scene, and enter the spot. She waited about 20 minutes. Then she had her homegirl drive around the block and pull up out front like she was dropping her off. When the Uber dropped her off at that shopping center so that she could collect her vehicle, she'd hurried up and got inside and pulled off, just in case Art was the type to either follow the Uber or have someone else follow it. And while she hadn't spotted a tail on the way to the shopping center, she was on alert for his vehicle. Her instincts were good, so she was not surprised when she saw it, slowly approaching the shopping center just as she was driving off. She applied evasive measures and lost him at the traffic light before she hit that highway. She wasn't sure what his intentions were, but she was going to get to the bottom of it. She made a phone call and provided the person on the other line the license plate number to the rental car that Art was driving.
Blow up, show up, you a hating